Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Henry Schein Dental Academy webinar series. My name is Adam, Marketing Specialist, and I'll be your moderator. Today's speaker is Dr. August D. Oliveira, who will discuss 3D printing for the Edentulous arch. Before we get started, we've got a few reminders for you. At any point during today's webinar, we do encourage your participation. Please type any questions you might have into the Q&A section of your control panel, and we'll answer them live at the end of the presentation. And Henry Schein is not offering CE credit for viewing or attending this presentation live or on demand. Dr. D. Oliveira, welcome.
Hey, how you doing?
Good.
Good.
Take it away.
All right. Should I just take it away? Cool.
Yep, go for it.
Hey, everyone. How are you? I am August. I am a general dentist in Los Angeles, and really happy to be here. I'm kind of a 3D printing nerd. So today is exciting for me because I get to kind of combine two passions that I have. One is 3D printing. The other is giving people their teeth back, whether that's removable, an overdenture, or a hybrid. So we'll be discussing how to do all three and how to use your 3D printer to deliver restorations for these folks. So let's get started. If you don't know who I am, and many of you probably don't. So I practice in a city called Encino. And if you saw the blockbuster movie Encino Man, you'll know what my patients are. I've written a couple of books, Implants Made Easy, Guided Implantology Made Easy, and Dental 3D Printing Made Easy. You may have heard of our website, Digital Enamel. So if you are a CEREC user, or even if you're not, we post all about all things digital. So my buddy, Dr. Todd Ehrlich, handles the cute stuff like veneers and bridges and crowns. I do stuff that's bloody. So implants, implant restorative, 3D printing, not usually bloody, but I am clumsy, so it could be. I'm on the faculty with a group called Implant Pathway. And if you haven't heard of Implant Pathway, it's pretty awesome. So Implant Pathway serves a group of people in Tempe, and they do most of their restorative work and implant work for free. So low-income vets, the homeless, various women's charities. So what we do is Arizona has this cool sort of rule that if you do work on an underserved population, you can get a temporary dental license. So all the classes at Implant Pathways are live and on patients. I teach digital and analog restorative. So we teach how to do all the things that you're gonna see, how to do 3D printers, all that jazz. I am definitely nerdy. So I'm also a software developer for virtual reality. So I'm working to develop VR and AR apps for dentistry. And so get to show you a little bit about it. Doesn't really pertain to what we're doing except for augmented reality. And we'll talk about augmented reality and how I use augmented reality to restore implant cases. So let's talk about what we're all here for. So we're going to cover three things today. I'm going to give you a very, very basic overview of 3D printing, just so we're all on the same page with sort of the lingo. We're going to go over 3D printed dentures, which are a big topic these days. And I'll give you my 2 cents on how to do it, what resins to use, and how to make a set of 3D printed dentures. I'm also going to talk about digital hybrids. And I'm a general dentist. I practice in an area where everyone pretty much has their teeth. So what I do is I volunteer my time. One clinic I volunteered at was called Brighter Way, which is associated with a homeless shelter, and then also at Implant Pathways. So I show dentists how to do all digital hybrids. So no models, no jigs, no all those bite blocks and whatnot. We do it all digitally. And you see the model there with these funny looking dominoes, and we'll talk about those, and we'll talk about augmented reality and how I use augmented reality to scan these and give the lab really well-fitting restorations or impressions for well-fitting restorations. They make the restorations for me. So how do you 3D print? So you 3D print, you're going to have to start with an intraoral scan. Now, sounds like from what I can read into, most of you have an intraoral scanner. You may or may not. And the nice people from Schein would be happy to let you know of all the different intraoral scanners you use. I've got 3. So I've got a Medit, I've got a Trios 3, and I have a Sirec Prime Scan. So what you do is you scan a patient, you generate an STL file. Either you yourself or a designer or a lab makes restorations using various programs. There's tons of different ones. 3Shape and exocad are the biggies. There's a free software called Mesh Mixer. And if you want to go ahead and Google that or go to the website, it's meshmixer.com, which is basically helps your models become 3D printable. Now, with the dawn of all these other systems, I don't use Mesh Mixer that much. I mostly use exocad. 3D print it. We'll kind of go over what's involved in 3D printing. And this is something that a lot of people get hung up on, which is the post-processing process. And I'll just explain it to you right now. So when you 3D print an object, you're actually using a, excuse me for 1 second here, guys. Let's see here. Well, you might hear some little kind of beeps in the background. Sorry, I've got another app open, so try to ignore them. So when you post-process something, what happens is when you're 3D printing, you're actually 3D printing out of flowable composite. And what we know about flowable composite is we have a nice cured layer and we have an air inhibited layer. And that air inhibited layer is toxic. If you've ever left bonding agent on your patient, uncured bonding agent on your patient, that free monomer can actually burn the gums. So we don't want to take an object just right out of the printer, get rid of some of the gooey stuff, and put it in a patient's mouth. So what we do is we wash it in isopropyl alcohol, preferably 99% isopropyl alcohol, and post-cure it in a light oven. Now, Schein's got all sorts of different printers, and they all have their own wash station and cure station. So, oh, you can't hear me. Adjust the volume settings. Sorry, guys. Let's try this.
I can hear you. I can hear you just fine.
You can hear me. Okay.
Yep.
Dr. Sandy can't hear me. So maybe Dr. Sandy has to...
I'd suggest exiting and coming back in if you can.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. Okay, that freaked me out, but now I'm not freaked out. So let's talk about the different types of dental 3D printers out there. And I'm just going to give you kind of a big overview of them. I'm not going to go too much into detail. So an FDM printer stands for Fused Deposition Modeling. If you go to Best Buy and you see a 3D printer, it's probably an FDM. FDMs are really cool because they actually use a little spool of plastic. They use a thermoplastic resin. If you've ever done an NTI night guard or made a custom tray, you've used the same material that they use. One of the great benefits of FDM is there's no post-processing. So there's no air inhibited layer, there's no alcohol, there's no curing ovens. But the drawback of FDM is that FDM typically can't print anything smaller than 300 microns. So in our dental world, 300 microns is giant. So we don't really use FDM with the exception of Valplast. And they actually have Valplast printers out there, and the company's called Arfona. So I use mainly DLP printers. And the way DLP printers work, if any of you are old as dirt like myself, you may have heard of a type of TV called a DLP TV. And what a DLP TV was this box that was in between the big tube TVs and thicker than an LCD TV. So a DLP printer uses a projector and a mirror to beam UV light into the flowable composite so we can get a model. Most of the printers on the market are DLP printers. You might be familiar with the Form 3B or the Form 2 printer from Formlabs. Great printer, and really brought 3D printing to the masses. The Formlabs printer is a laser printer, and instead of using a projector, it uses a laser. Not really apples and oranges when it comes to printers from DLP to laser. I prefer DLP because in general, DLP is faster. You may be, if you're into implants, you may have heard of a system called Chrome. And Chrome is a printed metal guide. And so SLS stands for selective laser sintering. And if you want to get technical, sintering is for nylon or zirconia. Selective laser melting is for metal. And so you can print in zirconia and metal. Typically, these printers are very expensive, and there's issues with porosity. I think that this is the future of final restorations being 3D printed, but I think we still need about 3 or 4 years before SLS is really good. LCD is another type of printer. Most LCD printers are attractive because they're cheap. So you can get them anywhere from $200 up to about, $3,000 or $4,000. I got to be honest with you, and this is just August, your buddy talking, not the opinion of Schein. I'm not a fan of LCD. I find that LCD, at least in the cheaper printers, is a little unpredictable when it comes to print, success. So there's a lot of print failures. Also, I find that LCD printers have an issue with burning out. So they basically use a phone screen or an iPad screen to print on. So I'm not a huge fan of LCD. You may have heard of a printer called Carbon. Carbon is a awesome, incredibly fast printer, and it's a type of printer called a clip, which stands for Continuous Liquid Interface Production. It is a super fast printer, probably out of the realm of most dental offices in that it's about 50 grand a year for 3 years. And after 3 years, you got to give them back the printer. But there's a bunch of other ones. EnvisionTech is a popular one. An EnvisionTech printer is roughly about 20 grand. And it's also a very fast printer, and also a really good option too if you really need that speed. A quick thing about printer anatomy. So all printers have a UV protective cover. So we're using UV light to cure composite. And if composites sit around, so if you take a tube of composite and squirt it out on the table, it's going to harden under light. So we have a UV protective covering. We have a resin vat. That's what holds the flowable composite. And it's important to note that when we're printing, I'll show you later on, we have something called a build plate. And the build plate drops into the flowable composite. Now, UV light comes up from underneath the bottom of the resin vat, and it cures your model layer after layer. So if you're printing on the bottom of the resin vat, you'll want that stuff to stick to the build plate. And so what it does is it peels off each 50 micron, 100 micron layer off the bottom of the build plate. So when I mentioned Carbon and EnvisionTech, they're really fast. So they can print a dental model in about 15 minutes. Most printers, if you ignore the marketing, are probably in the 40-minute to an hour range. And the way that these clip, or they also call them CDLM printers, print is they actually pump either nitrogen or oxygen into the bottom of the resin vat, make their own air inhibited layer, and those layers peel right off. Most computers have most printers have a little computer in them. And it's good that it has a little computer because the computer can connect to your network. It can store files. Let's say you're printing something that you need multiple copies of. It's got a little hard drive and it'll save it for you. Now, the build plate, which we'll talk about here, is where the models stick to. Now, you may see different printers, and a lot of printers talk about resolution. Now, resolution is a tricky term. So when I talk about resolution as a dentist, I'm talking about how small of a thing my cone beam can see, or how small of a thing my Trios or Cyric or Medic can see. Resolution in 3D printing, typically talks about the layers of your model. So how that model is built up, which is, believe it or not that important. What's really important is something called the XY resolution. So I'm a huge fan of the SprintRay line of printers. They have two printers. They have the SprintRay Pro 95 and the SprintRay Pro 55. So the 95 has an XY resolution of 95 microns. What that means is the smallest thing it can print is 95 microns. Now, that's cool for a night guard, for a denture, for a surgical guide. But if you want to print dies, or if you want to print hybrids or implant analog models, you'll notice the analogs don't fit. And the reason why they don't fit is the adhesive gap, or the gap around your analogs, are typically 75 microns or smaller. So you need a printer with under 75 microns to make that happen. So I've got both printers. So I've got the Pro 95 and the Pro 55. And a lot of people ask me, hey, August, which printer do I buy? And I tell them, look, the 95 is cool because it's got this really big build plate. And I'm sorry, I skipped over it on the last slide. But when you were a little kid, did you ever take a flashlight and shine the flashlight to a wall? And then as you got closer to the wall, that flashlight beam got clearer and smaller. So the same principle applies to 3D printers. So if you want a higher resolution, then the build plate is going to be smaller. And if you're cool with a 95 micron resolution, you've got a really big build plate. Having a big build plate allows you to print a lot more models. Not the scope of what we're talking about, but I make my own aligners. So I want to compete with, the Sure Smiles or whatever, high school student that's doing ortho in the mall. So I make my own aligners in-house. To do so, there's a lot of aligners. So I want a big build plate for that. However, I also do a lot of implants and I do some big cases in CEREC, and I want to make dies. And so I use my Pro 55 for mainly model work, and then I use my 95 for everything else. So we're going to talk about dentures and denture teeth. But I really wanted to talk really quick about a new resin called Bago Barcelo Smile Crown Resin. And this is an interesting resin in that it's actually FDA approved as a permanent restorative. So you can make a composite crown and cement it with permanent cement in your patient's mouth. It's strong, but it's not as strong as, say, Emax or zirconia. So it's about 116 megapascals compressive or tensile strength, and it's similar to like the old Empress porcelain. I personally like to use Emax or like to use zirconia for the strength and having a monolithic restoration. However, if I needed a long-term temporary, 116 megapascals is really comparable to PMMA or acrylic. So I can definitely see myself using this for implant bridges or hybrids as well. So let's talk a little bit about how we make 3D printed dentures. And I got to tell you, I've got this sort of love-hate relationship with 3D printed dentures. So on the one hand, you can't argue with the price. So to have a denture designed, and I'll talk about designers in a little bit, a set of dentures is about $35 to be designed. To 3D print it costs about maybe 15, 20 bucks. So you're looking at about $50, $55 for a set of dentures. So that's cool. My beef with 3D printed dentures, and look, I've been wrong a lot. So I will probably eat my words in a few years, but I sometimes worry about the strength. So I'll talk about it. I think that it is great for definitely immediates that the patient will probably just throw away in about 6 months. But I still liked milled or processed dentures for my permanents. But we do use them a lot since we do some implants. Mark had a question, can the printable permanent solution be used for full arch treatment of an implant hybrid? Yes. I would recommend that you use this as a precursor to your zirconia or Trilor final. But definitely you can use this instead of PMMA. And I got to tell you, that's really going to save you some bucks. So with the tie bases and the design, you're probably looking at about $200 or $300 an arch to 3D print a hybrid. Now, if you're smart and your patient's cool with going back in the dentures, you can actually reuse the tie bases for your final and save yourself some money in the final as well. But I'll get to hybrids later on in it. So there's 3 ways to 3D print a denture. One way, which I like the concept of, but I don't like doing them, is you just 3D print the denture base. And if you're not familiar with 3D printed resins, a number of companies have denture base materials that are 3D printable. So NextDent, Envision Tech, Lucitone 199 from Sirona. These are different resins that go with different printers, and you just print the base, and then you use good old-fashioned denture teeth and actually glue them into the sockets with the pink denture resin. You just put a little drop in these sockets, put the denture teeth into them, and then light cure them. Why do I not like this? Well, denture teeth are, they come in a little sheet, right? And sometimes with a denture, you've got sort of limited vertical. So what you have to do is basically use like a Duralay coping to cut the denture teeth so they fit in the socket. That's a lot of work. You're looking at 24 denture teeth to put in. Also, because they're dissimilar materials, so most denture teeth are made out of acrylic and the bases are made out of composite, I do worry about debonding. If it's an immediate that you're going to throw away in 6 months, cool. But I probably wouldn't do it for a final. My favorite way of digital dentures is the monolithic way. So you take that composite, like that Bago stuff I talked about, you just print an entire arch, and then you layer composite and stain on top of it. So the benefit is that you've got a really super strong restoration. It's monolithic, and which is awesome. The drawback is it takes a little artistry on your part to put the gums on. It looks like it would take a long time. You're actually looking at about a half an hour per arch, and my assistants are way better at it than I do. So this is a great way to go. The quickest, easiest, cheapest way is to print in 2 pieces. So print the base and then print the teeth and then loop them together. So you're going to print the base in gingival composite and you're going to print the teeth in tooth colored composite. And those are, you just take just like the first denture teeth model I showed, you just put a little bit of that gingival composite into the sockets, put them together, stick it in your light oven, and you're good. Not as pretty. You can dress it up to make it look nice by adding composites and stains to it. So this is the quickest way to get a denture and also the least expensive way. So everyone and their brother and sister are all excited about intraoral scanning. And I sound like a grumpy old man here. I mean, I love the concept of intraoral scanning a denture. However, let's think about this for a second. So what do we do when we take a custom impression for a denture, right? We take the custom tray, we put some compound on it, or I don't, I just use heavy body, and I do my border molding, right? You shake the patient's face all around and try to simulate, movements of the face that would dislodge the denture, right? So you can't do that with a scanner. And so with a scanner, remember anything that moves. So if you are familiar with intraoral scanning, anything that's not the same in multiple, scans of the patient gets cut off. So I found that my dentures tend to be either super short or overextended because the lab really doesn't have a good view of where that vestibule is. Now, I'm sure you guys are familiar with these two guys. So Dr. Wally Renee, brilliant and super cool guy, does a ton of research. He's in South Carolina. I forgot the name of the university, but he does some gruesome stuff too. So he did scans on fresh cadaver maxillas. And so what you're looking at is someone's maxilla, that hasn't been soaked in formalin, just chopped off. And so what he does was he scanned that, and he also took impressions and compared the accuracy. Now, what he found was that the intraoral scan had a cross-arch deviation, so a discrepancy between the two sides of the edentulous arch of between 75 and 100 microns. However, when he took impressions, it was more. It was 118 microns. So again, more pushing to do intraoral scanning for dentures. Mr. Eric Kukaka is a denturist from Canada, big digital denture guy. And he uses an Optrogate, and he feels that the Optrogate expands the vestibule enough to do intraoral scanning. He's a denturist, and he's awesome. I tried it a couple of times, and all my dentures were overextended. So I'm not a big fan, but I'll show you what I do for different dentures. Now, Nasir had a question. Is there really a difference in quality of scan between the new Medit scanner, the three-shape Trios basic scanner? Do you recommend one over the other? That's a great question. This is, again, completely anecdotal and just me. I have not tested the brand new, I think it's called the i7, the newest Medit scanner, but the current Medit scanner, compared to Trios, I have a Trios 3, so the basic Trios scanner. I found the Trios was easier to scan in the mouth. You sell 3-shape. Yeah, so I felt that the Trios was easier to scan in the mouth than the Medit. Personally, and this is just me, I find that the Medit is very comparable to the CEREC OmniCam before it was upgraded to 5.0. So it does the job. I found stitching wasn't as smooth as the Trios or the CEREC. But again, I know a lot of people that I really respect that love their Medit more. I got it, it's cool, but I don't use it a lot. So let's talk about what I do. Okay, so patient comes in, they have an existing set of dentures. And what is that existing set of dentures? Well, it's actually two things that we typically make when we make a denture. It's a custom tray, right? So it fits like a custom tray, it just doesn't have a handle. But we have the patient's vertical. So it's also a bite block. And so if you think about it, if you wanted to do this the old-fashioned way, you would take a wash impression in the patient's denture, take the denture away from the patient, give it to the lab, they would pour it up and return the denture. Well, that's cool, but I don't think there's a lot of patients that want to be without their denture. So this is what I do. I take the patient's denture, I put heavy body in it, I shape the patient's face, so I do all my border moldings. Then I do a wash. I look for any high spots, I grind them out before the wash. And I scan the impression with an intraoral scanner, and I scan the bite. So let me just show you this video, and I'll kind of talk you guys through it. So we take the impression, right? And so you can see the impression here. I cut the impression material away from the teeth. I scan the opposing arch. So in this case, the patient just has one denture. And then I do my buccal bite by popping the denture back into the mouth with the impression, right? Can you scan intraorally? In this case, I just did just for fun. I wanted the lab to make me a bite plate just so I could compare the fit of the two. And the bite plate didn't fit that well. But in a nutshell, that's what we do. So to reiterate, take the patient's denture, do a heavy body and a wash impression, get your border molding down, take it out of the patient's mouth, scan it in your hand, right? Making sure you capture some teeth for reference, pop it back in the patient's mouth, do your buccal bite. So if that's not clear, I'll explain it more at the end. So what if the patient has no teeth? No teeth at all. Well, you can certainly at that point scan the patient in the mouth because we're just going to make an occlusal rim. And then send it to the lab, or you yourself can print that model and make a occlusal rim. I love to use a facial thirds gauge, and I'm sure Schein sells them. So a facial thirds gauge, it's very unscientific, but what you do is, if you think about it, you've got this thing here called the glabella, right? And the glabella is between your two eyeballs. It's where your nose kind of ends and your forehead starts. If you take your finger into the glabella and take your thumb under your nose and close, that dimension between the glabella and underneath the nose should be the same as underneath the nose and the chin. And so I use my facial thirds gauge with occlusal rims to kind of get that vertical. And in this case here, we were doing upper and lower implants, and we used that. If you want to be really primitive, some people say that if you take your hand and put it on the patient's chin, it's roughly your face is the size of your hand when you are at video. Not really exact. I prefer the facial thirds gauge. Now, if you want to be really crazy and techie, you can actually skip a step. And so Evolve is a lab in Buffalo, New York, and they came up with this technique that I think is pretty sweet. What they do is they take the initial impression, so a scan or on the alginate, and in exocad, they do an upper teeth setup with no bite, just where they think the teeth should be. So the incisive papilla is really a great landmark when you've lost your teeth. And so the distance between the incisal edge and the papilla should be about 12.5 millimeters. And then also just below the nose to the incisal edge should be about 22 millimeters. So what they do is they do a teeth setup, send you the STL file, you 3D print it, and then you can also 3D print the occlusal rim and slap some wax on top of it, and then whittle down the occlusal rim. What's kind of cool about this is you can check the patient's facial midline to where the lab thinks the midline is going to be. And so it's kind of a nice way of just getting the basics down. what I find too is I find that these 3D printed occlusal rims with teeth tend to give me a better bite than just sticking a bunch of wax in there and having the patient mush down. If you really want to scan in the mouth and you say to yourself, August is full of it, I'm just going to scan in the mouth, you certainly can. But just like anything in intraoral scanning, if you want to get the most accuracy, you need to have a plan. And so what I do is I scan the rugi first, right? So get that central area first. Then go on the lingual side of the arch and then the buccal side of the arch. And once you've got most of that, then scan the palate. I'm going to tell you, it's really hard to scan the soft palate because it's moving around. So if you do have a problem scanning the soft palate, you can go old school. So get some old CAD/CAM powder. And all you youngsters out there that didn't live through the early days of CAD/CAM probably don't know what powder is. And so back in the day with the early CEREC machines and the early E4D machines, we would coat the teeth with zinc oxide powder to get rid of the reflection so we could get a better scan. So in that case, we're just put a little bit on the palate and it'll make it a lot easier to scan the palate. So in this case here, I actually sent it to a lab that used carbon. And so they printed this as a 2-piece denture. So they used Dentsply Sirona's Lucitone 199 material for the base. And for the teeth, I think Lucitone and Dentsply Sirona have their own denture teeth resin. And so they printed it out and it came out good. So let's talk about overdentures. So like I said before, I volunteered at a place called Brighter Way in Arizona that served the homeless and did a lot of dentures. And we also did a lot of full arch restorations for these guys and ladies. And one thing was kind of cool is a lot of labs would volunteer their time and the restorations for free. And I would volunteer my time as a dentist for free. And so I got to meet a ton of really cool lab technicians. And so if you know some lab technicians, they're kind of jaded about CEREC. They don't like CEREC or the thought of CEREC. And so I got to be friends. Todd, okay, cool. Hey, man. So there's one incredible, amazing lab technician, and you should go on Facebook and find him and friend him. His name is Arjen Deutsch. And Arjen's big thing is telescopic copings. So he does a ton of these telescopic copings and with removable overdentures that are probably some of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. And watching this guy was just amazing. So I was feeling a little cocky that day, and Arjen said, hey, dude, you think you're cool stuff? Why don't you make a denture on this guy, and I'll make a denture on this guy, and we'll give him the best one. Okay. Yeah, so I'll give you the best one. And so, okay, cool. So I'm like, no problem. So we'll talk about intraoral scanning of implants for hybrids later. But for an overdenture, what I like to do is I do scan in the mouth because the borders of an overdenture aren't as critical if you have a lot of implants than a conventional denture. And in this case here, we were doing upper and lower overdentures on this guy, and we were able to use regular scan bodies. And so I don't use regular scan bodies for hybrids. We'll talk about photogrammetry in a little bit. That's that AR device I was talking about. So we just threw in a bunch of scan bodies in there and scanned the patient up. And you can see here the patient's old denture has a huge anterior open bite. He's showing a ton of gingiva and just wasn't happy with it. So we scanned it. That weird blue thing I'll talk about a little bit later. It's a bite jig that I use by scanning the patient's old denture and cutting away the flange so that I could actually scan in the mouth and get sort of a buccal bite with it. But anyways, this was my digital denture in the corner, and it is pretty darn ugly. So I printed that on the carbon. We had a carbon printer over there, and not my finest work. So I saw his, and I'm like, dude, no. And so I went ahead and threw my 3D printed denture away, and we used his 3D printed denture. So he printed it also on the carbon using Lucitone 199 composite. And what he did, which is just brilliant, is he took basically within the software, you can make room for the locator housings, and he poked holes through all of them to serve as a vent. And so we're picking these up in the mouth. We're using Yupo Hard, which is a hard reline material. So we put the locators on, we put a little spacer on the locators, and those are the little pickup housings. We went ahead and picked that up in the mouth. And you can see Aryan's denture is just gorgeous, and mine just sucked. And you can see how happy this patient was. So you can see him on the right before and on the left after. Now, you may be saying to yourself, hey, August, okay, cool, I want to do digital dentures. Do I have to learn ExoCAD or 3Shape Design Studio to make them? And the bottom line is no. You may or may not have heard of these places called milling centers. And milling centers will have rooms and rooms full of mills. And they will mill stuff for you or design stuff for you. So if you want zirconia or you want a hybrid and you want to finish it yourself, you can send it to a milling center. And I'm a big fan of a milling center called Alien Milling. They're really reasonably priced, and they do have design services as well. One thing to note, and not ditching on CIREC here, but if I want to make a CIREC implant crown in my office, I got to pay about 75 bucks for a tie base, 75 bucks for a block, and then I got to glue them together, and I got to stain and glaze and do all this stuff. So a lot of milling centers can do the whole shoot and match for $134. So look into milling centers, just Google dental milling centers. Argent is a big one. Alien Milling is another big one. But if you just want design, I'm going to recommend a few really good designers. So Lee Kiki, and her name, I misspelled her name here, sorry guys. It's L-I and then a space, Q-I-Q-I. So these people all work through Facebook. And so if you go on Facebook and type L-I space Q-I-Q-I, you can reach Lee Kiki or Kiki. And Kiki is an amazing designer, and she is ridiculously cheap. So she can do a full upper and lower denture design for $35. To put that into perspective, if you use Blue Sky Bio or Blue Sky Plan, then it will cost you almost that just for the STL export. So for the price of exporting out of that is about 30 bucks. She'll do it for $35 all in. So she's awesome. And again, she only works through Facebook, so you got to find her on Facebook. If you're doing hybrids, there's a guy named Daniel Portal. And Daniel Portal works, used to be the head of customer service for ExoCAD. And he's also a master ceramist. So Daniel can design hybrids for about 150 bucks an arch. So all in 300 bucks upper and lower. Now, the El Primo designer is a guy named Jacob Farber. And Jacob Farber is in Belarus. So he's over by where Chernobyl is. And Jacob is a Pankey trained dentist who grew up in Belarus and moved back, thought he could retire and decided not to retire. So Jacob designs, he's $350 an arch for hybrids, but his work is just unheard of. I mean, really, really good. Okay, so let's talk about hybrids. So in the video game world, there's a term called extended reality. And within extended reality, we have some familiar terms and some not familiar terms. So virtual reality is something that's pretty cool. If you don't have an Oculus, you should buy one. They're a ton of fun. I'm developing a implant and root canal, basically teaching through virtual reality, and you can kind of see you're a dentist on a spaceship. It's kind of fun. So anyways, virtual reality is cool. Doesn't really have anything to do with what we're doing. However, I use augmented reality a lot in implants. And what augmented reality is, and if you saw on Snapchat, you can put little dog ears on your head. Augmented reality takes a QR code and overlays data over the QR code. So you may have heard of two systems out there, iMetric and PIC, and they look like little dominoes that go in the patient's mouth. And so it's an augmented reality camera that recognizes, and if you look at the little video, it might be kind of hard to see. You're going to see some colored dots on the dominoes. So the augmented reality device is finding the dominoes and finding where that implant is in space. Now you may ask yourself, well, why don't I just scan it with my CIREC? Well, all these systems, Trios, CIREC, all these things are great. They're all equally great for quadrants. But once you get cross arch, with the amount of images you take with CIREC or Trios, you start to implement a little bit of error. And teeth, we have dye spacer. It's not such a big deal. But with implants, we're dealing with a lot of internal connections. So the inaccuracy adds up. So if you're doing a lot of full arch, you want to still use your Trios or your CIREC, but you also want to add this augmented reality device. Now, just for kicks, mixed reality, it's something totally different. If you've ever used an XNav or any of these systems, these are mixed reality devices. So what they do is they see things in the real world. They make images in the real world, and you can interact with these images. So you'll see a lot more in dentistry with mixed reality coming up. So let me tell you how I do a digital hybrid. And I use a system called the iCam 4D. So what I do is I take the patient and I think to myself, well, self, how do I get the patient's bite? Before we do any sort of intraoral scanning, I say to myself, how am I going to get the video? And most full arch implant patients have a overdenture or they have a temporary hybrid. So they've already got that VDO. And a lot of the times they have the midline and they also have gingival display. Now the gingival display might be bad, but you can at least communicate to the lab. So what I do first is you see these little white squigglies. So scanning teeth is super easy. Scanning gums is super hard. So what I do is I'll talk a little bit more. I take white composite and I put it on the gums, and I actually use bonding agent on the gums. Doesn't sound like it works, but it does. And I make these little squigglies. And what this does is it relates the patient's bite to the intraoral scan. So next I do a soft tissue scan. So use your Trios, use your CIREC, and you want to make sure you also capture those squigglies, because what we're going to do in Trios or in CIREC is match those two together. And so we need those squigglies to match the two together. And the lab needs the soft tissue for the intaglio of the hybrid. And then you do a third scan with the Domino Scanner. And I'll show you some more pictures with the Domino Scanner. The Domino Scanner is the iMetric, the augmented reality device. We screw the dominoes into the patient's mouth, and this scanner only reads black and white. So it's not reading the gums, it's not reading the tongue, it's just reading the dominoes. And so in exocad or in 3Shape, you then merge the two scans. And so from the CIREC or the Trio scan, we got the gums, and from the iMetric, we've got these dominoes. So this material is called Liquidam. And so Liquidam is what I use. And this is just a video of me doing that. So think about it. Patients' teeth are in their mouth. They're happy with their temporary. They've got their VDO. So when I put this white stuff on the gums, it's going to relate the patient's bite. I take a buccal bite, and then I take the hybrids off, and now they got no teeth and they're collapsed. And then that will relate the two. So here's a really nice patient. Wears an overdenture, wanted to go with fixed. So we hooked him up. This was done at Implant Pathways, and we did this at no charge. And so you can see here, he's got a bunch of locators in there, and the angulation of the locators isn't great. So what we want to do is use angled multi-units. And as a side note, I don't do any hybrids implant level, right? I don't want to deal with internal connections and multiple paths of draw. So I only do implants at the multi-unit level. So we bring those multi-units and we angle those back. Use our little squigglies. So we scan the patient's overdenture in the patient's mouth. And then we use our Domino Scanner, the ICAM 4D, to read those dominoes. And so there are the different kind of scans. The black and white scan that you see in the bottom is the combined Domino scan with my CEREC Prime scan. And now the lab has all this data. Now, one thing that's really cool is doing a face scan. And there's lots of different ways to do a face scan. If you look at the picture on the lower right, that patient's hybrid is not so pretty, right? And it's not so pretty, one, because the dentist didn't pick up on that. But two, when the lab gets these scans, they don't see the patient's face. All they see is something on a screen. So it's great to incorporate a face scan. And one way you can do it is take a picture of a patient and just give it to them, and they can wrap the photo. But if you have an iPhone 10 or above, there's a free app called Bellis 3D. And Bellis 3D allows you to do a 3D scan of the patient's face. So we do two scans. We do a retracted and a non-retracted scan. But think about how valuable this is for a lab. Even if you're doing some veneers, to have that patient's face in there that you could then merge together. So Bellis 3D, I kind of lied. The app is free. To export is $1. So if you're that cheap, you know, fine. But $1 a scan is pretty good price. So this is what the lab gets from me. So they get the face scan. They've got all the different scans that I take in the clinic, and they merge it together. Now they've got the patient's physical midline, so they can see the patient's eyes, their nose, all that jazz. They know the patient's lip line, so they can talk about gingival display, see if a hybrid is the best way to treat them, or sometimes an overdenture is a better way to treat a gummy smile than a hybrid. So next, they can send us the STLs. You can 3D print it if you want. And so this was 3D printed monolithically. And so we added some gingival composite. Lots of different brands out there of gingival composite. I use a product called Annex Gum, and it comes with pink composite. It comes with gingival stains as well. And so we can add all those things together. And so this is the patient's final. We ended up going with zirconia on this patient. Interesting fun fact about this dude is that he broke all of his overdentures. He broke my 3D printed hybrid. And I thought, well, okay, he's a strong guy. And so I gave him the zirconia, and he broke the zirconia. So this guy is hard to treat. So I think what we're going to end up doing is using Trilor and seeing if that flexion of the Trilor material will help us out. If you say to yourself, August, I do not want to buy an iMetric scanner, which is about $24,000, or if you don't, do a lot of hybrids, you can still use your 3D scanner to make jigs. So if you are familiar with the old-fashioned way of doing a hybrid, we lute together jigs in the mouth, do a pickup impression, have an occlusal rim, and all those things can also be 3D printed. You can still 3D print the hybrid, layer the composite like we did here, and deliver it to the patient. All right, so that's all I have for you. Try to check out Digital Enamel if you want to learn more stuff. All my cases that I showed and more are up on digitalenamel.com, and just check it out. So I'm going to go ahead and open it up for questions. So I only got 2, so I'll go ahead and hit them. Jonathan Zimmerman asked, where can we find your books for purchase? You can find them at digitalenamel.com under the store. So go to store and they'll do it. Is there a way to get a copy of this recording? That's a Schein thing. And maybe
yes, this will be recorded and sent out.
Shoko had a question. After your lecture, can you please provide contacts to work as a volunteer in these centers? Yeah, you can just Google Brighter Way. So Brighter Way, and I think it's just brighterway.com. That is in Phoenix, Arizona. And just ask them and just say you want to do, they do something pretty cool. So they have a day called Extraction Day. And on Tuesdays, it's free extractions for anyone who wants an extraction. So if you are not good with extractions, a bunch of oral surgeons volunteer there. So if you want to learn how to extract teeth really well, there is a line out the door for extractions. So you can definitely do that. They have that set up. As far as the hybrids go at Brighter Way, again, you'll have to talk to the director there and see who's doing that there. I'm no longer there. I'm at Implant Pathway. And so if you contact implantpathway.com, you can see about volunteering there. We do teach classes there. And if you want to learn some amazing stuff, IV sedation, sinus lifts, basic implantology, or see yours truly and learn how to do digital hybrids, we have classes there. We actually have a class next week. I think there's 2 spots left if you want to do that. That was great. Thank you. Any other questions?
I think you answered them all.
All right. I know Moody with Implant Pathway. I can't speak highly enough of the courses. Yep, Moody is awesome. I love Dr. Moody. He is just an amazing dude. So I agree with you.
Cool. I think we will wrap right on time here.
Thanks, everybody.
Awesome. Thank you. And if anyone has any other questions, please feel free to email webinars@henryschein.com or digitalenamel.com. We will send out the recording of this webinar sometime in the next week, so keep your eyes peeled for that email. I would like to thank you all and hope everyone has a great night.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.